priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people, that we should show forth the praises of him whom hath called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Let's go to God in prayer this morning. Father, God, I ask you this morning to anoint this word. Anoint our lips, God, that we can bring your word out, God. Hide us behind the cross and allow you to show through us today, God. Lord, anoint our lips, anoint our ears that we may hear, God. Give us the word, God, the bread of life. Bring it forth, God, to change and heal, deliver, and set free. God, let us know that we've heard from you this morning, God. God, in Jesus' name. God, in Jesus' name. But it says you are a chosen generation. A generation is all the people born and living at about the same time. Born and living about the same times. In other words, in my lifetime, in my generation, I've seen a generation that has passed. I've been involved with the generation that has passed. I've been involved with my generation. I think I'm the generational X, and some of you's millennial, and some of you's different generations. But that's not what I'm talking about. I remember the days of going to the house of God and seeing people, they just couldn't wait to get to the house of God. I remember the days when we'd pull up and hear them praying out in the woods. I remember the days when people said to themselves, I can't wait till we go to the house of God. I remember the generation that when I was growing up as a kid, every time the church doors was open, I had to go to the house of God. I remember a day in the generation when people was excited to serve the Lord. I remember seeing that generation fall further and further away from that excitement. I remember a generation that was on fire for God.
Amen.
Y'all help me preach a little bit this morning, because apparently we're not part of that generation. I remember a generation that just couldn't wait when the church house was open. They just couldn't wait to get amongst the brothers and sisters and worship God. They just couldn't wait to find somewhere to pray. I remember my dad growing up, every morning we'd go to school, my dad would be out in the camper, he would be praying and crying out to God, and I hardly ever find anybody praying anymore. I remember a generation when we'd go to revivals, people would pack it out. Church would go help other churches. I remember a generation that when somebody was down and out, that somebody would help them. I remember a time when people had faith in God.
Amen.
But as time and generational curses has come upon us, I see that we're just slipping away. How many will help me preach this morning? Does anybody remember how Grandma used to pray?
Yes.
Am I the only one? Does anybody remember how Grandpa used to pray? How they used to read their Bibles every night? And the old slogan was, a family that prays together stays together. But now we blame it on drugs and alcohol. If it wasn't for drugs and alcohol, my babies wouldn't be in prison. My babies wouldn't be lost and undone. It ain't the drugs and alcohol. It's the generation that has fell away from God and quit teaching the people how to worship God.
Come on.
So now you know where I'm headed this morning. Now you know where I'm headed this morning. So here he told him, he said, but you are a chosen generation. A chosen. And I'm fixing to teach a series on generational curses. I don't have time for that today, but I'm fixing to, I'll let you know when I finish studying it out. But we are a chosen generation. But are we? Are we that chosen generation? And let's look over in the book of Exodus and the 19th chapter. I'm going to do a lot of reading real fast. The book of Exodus, the 19th chapter. And the first verse says, in the 3rd month, when the children of Israel were gone forth out of the land of Egypt, the same day came they into the wilderness of Sinai. For they were departed from Rephidim and were come to the desert of Sinai. Let me get that right. I hate when I get tongue-tied. Sinai. And they were from and were come to the desert of Sinai and had pitched in the wilderness And there Israel camped before the mount. And Moses went up unto God. And the Lord called unto him out of the mountain, saying, this is the Lord talking to Moses, Thus shalt thou say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel. Bear in mind, the Lord was telling Moses a message to tell to his people. You understand that? The Lord was talking to Moses out of the mountain, and he was telling him to give the children of Israel a message direct from heaven. And the 4th verse, he says, you have seen what I did unto the Egyptians, and how I bare you on eagle's wings, and brought you unto myself. Now therefore, if ye will obey my voice, and obey means to comply with the command or direction or request. He said, if you will comply with my demand. Therefore, if you will obey or comply with my voice indeed, and keep my covenant, then shall you be a peculiar treasure. And then and only then shall you be a chosen people. Do you understand? And he said, and then shall you be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine. And ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel. What I want you to understand, the children of Israel was not under grace. The children of Israel was brought unto the law. So they didn't have a rescuer for their soul and their salvation that way, but they was in bondage, and God heard their prayer, and he sent Moses down to free them out of the land of Egypt. And he said, if you'll tell my people, would you give them a message for me? If they will obey my voice, if they will comply with my voice and keep my covenant, then shall ye be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine. He gave them a stipulation in the plan. He gave them a guideline to go by. They had to obey the voice of the Lord. And we'll turn over to the book of Hebrews. That was that generation. And that generation didn't have a Lord and Savior. They had Moses. They had God. Amen. But their sins wasn't done away with, because Moses only delivered them out of Egypt land and out of bondage. That was that generation. But you and I are of a generation that's been covered under the blood. We got more freedom. We got more power. You know, we don't have to go to a priest and sacrifice the blood of animals. I know the blood has already been shed. We are of a different generation. And if those people was God's people, here's where we at today. In the book of Hebrews, the third chapter and the 6th verse. It says, but Christ as a son over his own house. Whose house, what does that say? Are we? Whose house are we? If we hold fast the confidence and the rejoicing of the hope firm unto the end. And I want you to understand that God was with the children of Israel. But now God is in us. That generation didn't have what we have. It was a different generation. But the stipulation then was, if you will obey my voice, this generation shall be a blessed people. This generation, I'm preparing them a land that's flowing with milk and honey. I've made provision that you will end up in the promised land. I mean, that was the promise that God had gave that generation, a land on earth of milk and honey. But now we in a different time zone. The blood has been shed, and the Messiah has done come and died on the cross for our sins, and the veil in the temple was rent from top to bottom, that you and I can enter into that place of holiness. But here it says, but as Christ a son over his house, whose house we are, if we hold fast the confidence and the rejoicing of the hope firm unto the end. And the 7th verse. Wherefore, as the Holy Ghost said, today if we will hear his voice, harden not your hearts, as in the day of provocation. And that means in the day of rebellion. That's what that word means, rebellion. Harden not your hearts as in the rebellion. Provocation, in the day of temptation. That means in the day of trials. He said again, harden not your hearts as in the provocation, the rebellion, in the day of temptation, trials, in the wilderness. For, in the 9th verse, when your fathers tempted me, proved me, and saw my works 40 years, going back to the children of Israel. Going back to the children of Israel. Wherefore I was grieved, in the 10th verse, wherefore I was grieved with that generation. That generation, the time that those folks was born, the time, that lifetime that generation was born, the people that lived in that generation, here it says that generation, that God was grieved with them and said they do always err. That means they always go astray. Where at?
In their heart.
In their heart. Where does it start at? Where does my rebellion against God start at? It starts right here in my heart zone. It starts when doubt creeps in. It's not about the situation. Doubt cannot take over unless I allow it into the heart zone.
Amen.
Unless I allow the rebellion to slip in my heart, it can't take hold of my life. And here the children of Israel saw God's work for 40 years. And he said, I was grieved with this generation, and said that they do always err in their heart, and they have not known my ways. In the 11th verse. So I swear in my wrath, they shall not enter into my rest. The 12th verse. It says, take heed, brethren, lest there be any of you. Let me give you some more. Take heed, brethren, lest that there be in any of you an evil heart. Of what? Unbelief. And departing from the living God. Take heed, man. You need to evaluate your life. You need to take a real good look at your life, and you need to be aware of at least that there be any of you, at least there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief, in departing from the living God. In the 13th verse. But exhort one another daily, while it is called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. For we are made partakers of Christ if we hold the beginning of our confidence steadfast unto what? The end. While it is said, today if we will hear his voice, harden not your hearts as in rebellion. For some, when they had heard, did provoke or rebel. Howbeit not all that came out of Egypt by Moses. And we know that Brother Drones preached here many times, and we've heard many people say that the ones that went into the promised land it was the only ones that was born in the wilderness. Those 40 years, that's the ones that got to go into the promised land, not the people that God delivered out. That generation God was grieved with. Why? Because they hardened their hearts.
Amen.
And they rebelled against God. That was that generation that rebelled against God, and therefore they did not get to enter in to the promised land. How many knows the story?
Yes.
But yet there was a chosen people. There was a peculiar people. That was God's people. But through their rebellion and through the hardness of their heart, how many knows the wrath of God came against them? And none of them that was brought out of the children of Israel because of rebellion and because their heart got hard, they didn't get to enter in to the promised land.
Amen.
That was that generation. That was the generation of rebellion. That was the generation of crying to God, and God answered them, but He didn't answer them good enough, I guess. You know, by a pillar of cloud by day and a fire by night. I mean, we see they went across the Red Sea. He fed them from manna from heaven and all this stuff. God made provisions for them, but in their spirit of rebellion, they hardened their hearts and it grieved God. That was the generation of that time. For some, when they had, in the 16th verse, for some, when they had heard, did provoke. Howbeit not all that came out of Egypt by Moses, in the 17th verse. But with whom was he grieved 40 years? Who was he grieved with? Question mark. Who was he grieved with for 40 years?
Children of Israel.
That generation. Why? Why was he grieved with that generation? What specific thing did they do? It's been tough so far because the enemy don't want to. You guys are beautiful. The enemy don't want me to preach this, but I'm going to preach it anyway. Who was the Spirit grieved with? That generation. Why was the Spirit grieved with that generation? Because of provocation. Because they got in the spirit of rebellion. But He said, if you'll listen to my voice and obey my voice, you will be that chosen people. But if you do not, I will grieve myself against you. And if you step up against me in the spirit of rebellion, you will not get to walk into the land that I promised you. Here's the deal. God was grieved with that generation. Why was He? But with whom was He grieved 40 years with? Who was it? The very ones that He called got tired. He got tired of the rebellion.
Amen.
I'm preaching something now.
Come on.
He got tired of the rebellion. And you say, preacher, you need to just shut up and let me have an easy pass. Let me tell you something. It's my job to preach you the Word of God.
Come on.
If I don't, I read this morning that there's going to be some blood on my hands. And I don't want no blood on my hands. I want to preach you the truth. I want to tell you that you might be a chosen or a royal priesthood. I've heard it preached all my life that you're a chosen generation. But let me tell you something. If you might be chosen at one time, but if you walk in the spirit of rebellion and you grieve the Spirit of God, I promise you one thing, you won't get to enter into the promised land. Because with whom was He grieved 40 years with? Was it not with them that had what? Sinned, and their carcasses fell in the wilderness?
Amen.
Why did their carcass die in the wilderness? Was it God's will for them to die in the wilderness? Was it God's pleasure for them to die in the wilderness? What caused them to die in the wilderness? It's because that generation had a spirit of rebellion somehow drilled in their heart. And whatever they seen the past generation do, it just stuck with them. But thank God for the children that was born in the wilderness. Thank God for the children that was there and that got to see the promised land, because they didn't get to view the generation before them. Somewhere it was instilled into the children of Israel to be a rebellious nation. They didn't just come up with it on their own. Somewhere they seen somebody rebel. Well, y'all quiet this morning. It's a generation thing. I was born back in the day when I remember, like I said, Mom and Daddy praying for hours, and people would come to your house and have all-night prayer meetings. How many remembers that?
Yeah.
How many remembers us calling fast and people fasting for 40 days and, oh, you ought not do that anymore. That's not popular no more. That you don't know why the church is dying up like it is, it's because this generation stinks.
Amen.
Amen. Come on.
Oh, I can't get ahead of myself. I can't get ahead of myself. Who was he grieved with for 40 years? Was it not them that had sinned, whose carcasses fell in the wilderness? 18th verse. And to whom swore he that they should not enter into his rest, but to deliver them. But, let me read that again, 18th verse. And to whom swore he that they should not enter into his rest, but to them that believe not. So in the 19th verse, so we see that they could not enter in because of what? Unbelief. Somewhere, I was meditating on this morning, and somewhere, you know, can I just take about 5 minutes preliminary on this, and then we'll move on. I mean, have you ever read the story of the children of Israel, what God did for them? I mean, he delivered them out. And on their journey, their shoes never wore out. Their clothes never wore out. The food never ran out. The water never ran out. God provided a fire by a cloud by day and a fire by night. And when he went up across the Red Sea, God departed the Red Sea. All the provision that God gave them, manna from heaven, all the things that God blessed them with, did they just rebel because they just got an idea to rebel? Was they out there and seen all these miracles? The thing about it is, I don't know if their generation that brought them into this world had seen the blessings of God. I don't know if they ever seen the miracles like these people had. But what was fresh in their mind is what the generation had taught them to be. Because I don't know about you, if I was out in the desert, by the way I think right now, if I was walking in the desert and I was getting my free meal every day and my pure drinking water, and God kept me warm at night and he kept me cool in the day and he made all these provisions, and you think, my God, have you ever questioned that? How could they complain?
Man.
Have you ever thought about that? How can they complain? You got all this stuff provided for you, but yet you still grumble and complain, and it costs you the promised land. A promised land. My God, where did that come from? It must have come from a generational thing. A generational curse is a bad thing. If all you've had in your life instilled in you is grumbling, complaining, guess what you're going to be?
Complaining.
Oh, God has brought me. Listen, I remember when we didn't have nothing to eat and we didn't have no money coming in, and I was begging for jobs. I was doing everything. But yet now God's blessed me so much. I can't. Sometimes I find myself wanting to complain, and I get to thinking, I look around and see all that God's blessed me with, and I think, my God, why do I want to complain? It's because I get around a generational person that when I get around somebody talking doubt and negativity, I get around somebody talking bad about somebody, it wants to rub off on me because it's a generational thing that people has moved away from God. And you know what? I want to be that one to bring people closer to God.
Come on.
Because did their rebellion cause them to miss the promised land? Yes or no?
Yes.
And then we'll take this story up, because that was them. When they was under Moses gave them the Mosaical law, and God gave them Mount Sinai, gave the 10 Commandments and brought them under the law. So they was not actually free, but God did bring them out of bondage. But that generation was a chosen generation. There was a chosen generation. That was God's people. But even God himself got grieved with that chosen generation. And because of their provocation, it blocked them from entering into the promised land. Why did they do that? Something had shown them how to rebel. I'm showing my grandkids things I shouldn't show them. Not nothing bad, but I let him buy one more than I should. And then when Mom and Daddy tells him no, he complains a little bit. Where did he learn that from? Then it gets on to me all the time. You don't need to let him do that. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So, how does it, listen, he gets in my car. I hope Cody didn't watching this part. But he gets in my car and he mashes every button. He knows just about what every button in my car operates. He knows how to open the hatch, and if I close it, he'll reach up there and climb up and open it. He knows it's, why? Because I taught him. I taught him that. How did he learn how to open the hatch on my car? Because I taught him. How did he learn how to open the sunroof in my car? Because I taught him. How did he know to turn the radio up loud as he can get it? Because I taught him. How did he know how to change the station and put it to a station that he likes? He likes to thump, and then he'll get up in the seat. How did he know these things? He didn't know it unless somebody showed him. And you and I, how do we know how to be rebellious against God? It's not because God put that seed in us, because when we become a new creature in Christ, the old things passed away. Behold, all things become new. The thing that God put in us is not what we're acting like.
Amen.
And we pick this story up in the book of Matthew, in the 17th chapter. And when they come to the multitude, and when they were come to the multitude, they came him a certain man, kneeling down to him, saying, Lord, have mercy on my son. Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is a lunatic and sore vexed. For oftentimes he falleth into the fire and into the water. And I brought him to thy disciples, and they could not cure him. And look at the 17th verse. Then Jesus answered and said, O faithless and perverse, what?
Generation.
And God started dealing with me. Faithfulness. He said, you owe faithfulness. And to be faithfulness or faithless, it means to disannul. It means to be untrustworthy. It means to be unreliable. It means to be skeptical of things. It means to be unfaithful. It means to be unbelieving. Unfaithful means to be doubting. This is the generation that you and I, it's an unfaithful to God generation. Amen? Y'all come on, help me a little bit. When he looks at it, the house of salvation, and I was talking to a good friend of mine, he's a pastor of a very successful Baptist church, and I was talking to him just a couple of weeks ago, and man, I mean, they got a lot of people going to their church and everything, but me and him had some one-on-one time, and I asked him, I said, brother, out of all the people you got going here, how many people is very faithful to that you know that when you're going to open the doors, and they're going to be here every time the doors is open? That's how I was raised, that when it comes to the house of God, it doesn't matter if you have a flat tire, you go, this is what I was taught. My dad, when we was growing up, if we had a flat tire and it was church time, he would go borrow somebody's tire and take it off in their vehicle with or without permission, and he was going to the house of God. This was instilled into me. This is what that my mom and dad planted into me. That's what I got to do. This is what, and I was asking this preacher, I mean, they do have a successful church, have a lot of people there, a lot of money coming in and everything. Every time I work on the church, there's always cash and pay. You know, they don't have no bills, they don't have no pressure, they got the money. And I asked him, I said, out of all the people, on the scale from 1 to 100, how many families do you deem to be faithful? Faithful that you know that you can depend on in every situation. I asked him, and it blew my mind. You know what he told me, Brother Jerome? He said 8%. 8%. 8% that he knows he can trust, that he knows he can depend on, that he knows that they're going to be faithful to the house of God. Well, does it really matter if I go to church? Well, you know what? Yes, it does.
Yeah, amen.
It really does, because how do we grow a body when you're not here? This morning I got some ribs missing. This morning I got some feet missing. This morning I got some hands missing. This morning I got some folks' fists missing, and the body ain't complete. And I don't know about you, but I cannot build a house with just one arm. I might can, but it'd take a whole long time. And I can't do it by myself. I would have to have some help.
Amen.
8%. And here's what Jesus said. This man said, my son is possessed with the devil, is what he was. And I took him to your disciples, and they couldn't cure him. And then Jesus answered and said, oh, faithless and perverse generation. And perverse means showing a deliberate, intentionally, and obstinate, in other words, stubbornly refusing to change. Desire to have in a way that is unacceptable in spite of the consequences. In other words, I'm just not going to do it in spite of the consequences. I'm not going to be perverse is to go against what God wants me to do in spite of the consequences. What's quiet in here?
Bless him, Lord.
I'm going against God in spite of the consequences. How many's ever went against God in spite of the consequences?
Amen.
Can I get a hallelujah or something?
Amen.
Hallelujah.
I mean, God, I'm fixing to do something that I know you're not happy with, but I've got grace and you forgive me and all this and it's all well. And let me tell you, His grace is sufficient. But one thing about it, even with the children of Israel, He got grieved with them and it cost them the promised land. And you and I, if we're not careful, we may think that we're the chosen generation, and we might be. But the problem with this generation is the same generational problem that Jesus had when He was alive. We are faithless and we are perverse. This generation, we don't do what we're supposed to do.
Amen.
Jesus answered and said, oh, faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I suffer you? In other words, how long? How many knows what that word suffer means? Just bear with you. How long shall I bear with you? Then He said, bring him hither to me. And 18th verse, and Jesus rebuked the devil, and he departed out of him, and the child was cured from that very hour. Then Jesus came to the disciples. Then came the disciples to Jesus and said, why could not we cast him out? And Jesus said unto them, because of your unbelief. But verily I say unto you, if you have faith as a grain of mustard seed, ye shall say unto this mountain, remove hence to yonder place, and it shall be removed. And I like this part here. And nothing shall be impossible to you. Nothing. And he throws this in. And he throws this in the 21st verse for good measure. He said, but how did this kind go out but by fasting or by prayer and fasting? That's important. Don't miss that. Don't miss that part. That's very important. We'll go back up to 17th verse. Oh, faithless and perverse generation. You know, I'm just going to take about 5 minutes and hopefully I can close. I remember back in about 2001 and 2002, I can't remember, maybe 2000. But you know, I got one kid that struggles with drugs and alcohol. I'm not knocking him, it's just what he does. And I was thinking that my mom and dad, from the time I was born, that generation, they brought me up. Then I tell you, we'd be in church sometimes 6 weeks straight, every night. Have you ever heard somebody been in a revival 6 weeks straight? Have you ever been in a revival 6 weeks straight? How many's been faithful every night to that revival for 6 weeks? I have. I'm going to ask you an honest question this morning. I might not be making you shout this morning. If I called a 6-week revival here, how many would guarantee you'd be here every night? had, what, 3 hands? How many guarantee me you wouldn't? Don't be honest with me. How many guarantee me you wouldn't be here every night? Now, come on, chickens. You see, this is a generational curse. You're not honest with us, and you're not honest with yourself. And if you ain't honest with yourself, you sure ain't honest with who? Well, you call me out. I'm doing it on purpose. How did I learn not to be honest with God? Because I just showed you why. Because it's my generation. And I want my kids, I don't know if them stupid drugs and alcohol, they got my kids. Let me tell you what happened. About 2002 or 2000, I quit church for a little while. I never seen my mom and dad quit. Everything they always taught me is to be faithful to the house of God. And that was instilled in me. And when we started bringing our kids up for a while, and we can blame it on the drugs and alcohol all we want to, but I shouldn't have never quit church in the first place and allowed that generation to see that it's okay for mom and daddy to take some time off. I might as well too. And we want to blame it on the drugs and alcohol. I need to look in the mirror. And my God, I'm sorry for failing my kids because they see me be a generational backslider.
Amen.
How many's ever done stuff you didn't want your kids to do and they end up doing it?
Yep.
Where did they learn how to do that? Where did they learn how did our kids learn how to be unfaithful to the house of God? Who did they learn it from? I'm speaking specifically about our kids. Who did they learn it from?
Yep.
Who did they learn how to be out of church? Who did they learn that it was okay from? You see, it's that generational thing. I never seen it in my generation. I'm talking about my parents. All I ever seen was, even though hell was raging, the generation that I was brought up in and the generation that I seen, that's what keeps me strong today. Even though hell is raging against me, it's because I seen a generation that fought hell and stood for the truth. And no matter what come at them, they still served God and believed in the thing that they preached. This was the generation that I was used to being around. And this is why you see me hard-headed and struggle, or hard-headed and stern about serving God. It's because I was taught in a generation that to be faithful to God. How many wants the church to be blessed?
Man.
But if I don't feel like coming today, guess what I'm going to do? I'm trying to point out something here. If I don't feel like coming to church today, guess what I'm going to do?
Stay home.
Help me out, church. I'm going to be a holy roller, right? Wake up and say, "Holy are you, Lord," roll over. So, but then we raise our children up. And our generation is, let me read the definition. All the people born and living at about the same time. In other words, all the people that was born before me, and then I was born, I seen the way they was, but they died off, and here I am. This is what I am. And the legacy that I leave, the next generation will carry on my legacy. And I remember a time when I was a child, I went to Brother Turtle's tent meeting, and the mosquitoes would eat you up, and there was thousands and thousands of people sitting under that old gospel tent. But you don't hear that anymore. That was a generational thing. It's all gone away with. And you know what went with it? That when we lay hands on the sick, they stay sick. But back in them days, when they laid hands on the sick, they recovered. What has happened? It's the generational thing. And Jesus said, and the disciples said, "Why couldn't we carry this man?" How many's ever laid your hands on somebody? Why can't we do the works that Jesus did? How many's ever wondered that?
Yes.
Oh, we don't see no signs and wonders. The Bible says to lay hands on the sick, they shall recover. We lay hands on the dry hand, and with a dry hand, we don't get none but the rattles, my dad used to say. Listen, when they come in a wheelchair and they leave in a wheelchair, is that the way it's supposed to be? Jesus said, the works I do shall you do also even greater. And you think I'm crazy when I tell you that we can do the same things that Jesus did. But Lazarus was dead 4 days, and everybody said, oh, if you'd been here, our brother wouldn't die. And he said, roll the stone away. Oh, but now he's stinking. But he said, Lazarus, come forth. And Lazarus came out of that grave. That's the generational things that our kids need to see. This is the things that this world needs to see. They need to see a generation that's faithful to God. And not just in attendance, I was just saying that, but I'm talking about in prayer and in fasting and being faithful and and sharing the love. Oh, you didn't think I was going to leave without saying that, did you? How does my kids learn how to be a smart aleck? How does my kid know it's okay to defy and rebel against what God wants? Where did my kids learn that smart mouth from? I know where my kids learned to cuss from. I was joking. They didn't learn it from us, did they? I'm going to get in trouble with that. But where did they learn this stuff from? How many want your kids to do better?
Yes.
What did they learn from you? Faithfulness begins where? In the house of the Lord.
Yes.
I feel like it didn't come out the way God gave it to me, but
Yes.
I preached it the way God gave it to me.
Yes.
The children of Israel was cursed because of the generational thing. They rebelled in the wilderness. And you think, my God, they had manna from heaven. They was fed. You know, God took care of them, right? How could they ever complain?
Amen.
What gives them the notion that rebelling would work? Somewhere they had to learn that, right?
Yes.
Right? That's right. The seed of rebellion got planted somewhere because they was born in a generational thing. They was born at the same time, or they was living and all was born about the same time. And do you understand how that works? If I'm born when somebody's 80-year-old and I spend 10 years of their life with them and they pass away at 90, and then, you know, I was part of that generation. Right? And then my generation, how many is learning from me? How many want your kids in the house of God?
Yes.
Have you ever taught them that it's okay to come on when it's convenient for you? Because I tell you what, I was talking to my son the other day. I said, man, it's been about 7 years since you've been in church. Oh, don't say that. Got on his nerves a little bit. Because it pricks his heart. It bothers him. And I got to thinking, how can my son that was raised in church think it's okay not to go to church? How could he do that? Because there was a time in my life I showed him the way that it was okay. Well, you preaching stupid. Well, blame it on God. I showed my kids how to just not go to church. Because that 2 or 3 years that I was out of church, I never really talked about the Lord. I really didn't do anything mean or wrong. Or I really didn't. I know I'm going to get some criticism over this, and that's fine. But I'm trying to teach you how generational things work. I remember a time going to church when it wasn't dead. I remember a time when we go to church that people was praising God. Now you have to drag it out. Come on, somebody, you need to take some kind of excitement drug before you come to church. Somebody needs to take them some speed before you know. I'm just kidding. Drink a bunch of coffee or something. Get excited. But where did we learn how to be so dry? How many remembers a generation that loved to serve God?
Yes.
Is anybody in here have any past parents or grandparents or family that really was faithful to God? Raise your hand.
Yes.
Do you remember that time?
Yes.
Is anything different now than it was then? Be honest with me.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, let me go back and reiterate on this. How many remembers when grandparents and all prayed all night long, and you had parents and grandparents that really loved to pray and worship God, and man, how many remembers those times? Okay, do we see them now?
No.
We don't see no all-night prayer meetings no more?
No.
Let me ask you, how many's ever seen an all-night prayer meeting?
Yes.
How many's seen one in the last 10 years?
No.
Okay. And when I ask how many would really desire to have one all night long, how many would be willing to raise your hand? How many would oppose it? See? Hey, honestly, I like it. I like it. We need, honest, we got to be honest, right? But do you remember people praying all night long? And you don't see it anymore, right? I know y'all want me to shut up, and I'm fixing to. But I'm trying to teach you something. How many wants the church to change?
Yes.
How many wants the lost people to be saved? But sometimes we come in here so ill at the world. And who gave us the okay with that? I've seen people lie in a church house. How many's ever seen that?
Yes.
How many's ever seen somebody lie in a church house? Well, but we find a generation in the Bible when Ananias and Sapphira, they lied in the house of God. What happened to them?
Fell dead.
They fell dead. But as generations, things got looser and looser and looser. God ain't changed. But if we have the presence of God in here like we should, and if the place was anointed like it should be, then we would see a time when somebody would come into the gates or come in the house with a gun or something. God would just take them out of here.
That's right.
But our minds are so, this is just a building. Right here, this is a building, right?
Right.
We are the church. And when we come in here and our minds are drifting, and right now some of your minds are drifting, I wish they'd shut up. I can feel it. Because he's meddling. No, I'm preaching you what God gave me this morning. Where did we learn to be how we are right now? That's just all I'm going to ask. Where did we learn how to be rebellious? Has anybody ever caught yourself being rebellious?
Yes.
I have. Where did I learn that? You can stand easy. The children of Israel